Please welcome Jeffrey Sachs, Columbia University, Director of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network.
Colleagues, and first to Dennis Snower and Dirk Messner, thank you for bringing us together. We are members of think tanks. Our job is to think, to complain, and to make our voices heard. I hope that most of us are not politicians in the room, but really here as thinkers, because we actually need the thinking right now. As I sat through the discussion, I just became more and more nervous. I think there's very little to be complacent about right now. By the way, Donald Trump doesn't agree on anything. He doesn't understand anything. He doesn't care. And he's representing a very powerful group of super elite interests that don't give a damn. That's very dangerous. And the fact is that we're living in a quite dangerous world right now. And there is no reason for complacency. And our institutions are not working. And our governments are not working, actually. Mine, first and foremost. We are in a massive political crisis, the likes of which we've not seen, perhaps since the Civil War. And I don't think I'm speaking hyperbolically. We're in a very historic place right now. And it's really worthwhile to think about that just for a moment, because the rate at which our world can spin out of control is absolutely astounding. So we're at the 100th anniversary of World War I right now, a war that 100 years ago was raging right here, took 20 million lives. This is the year of the Bolshevik Revolution, 100th anniversary. This is the year when France and England really perfidiously divided up the Middle East in the death throes of the Ottoman Empire and created 100 years of chaos by creating states that they wanted to govern so that Britain could steal the oil from Mosul, France could have its colonies, Britain could control the route to India. Okay, that's the 100th anniversary. Take it the 90th anniversary here in Berlin, just after hyperinflation, just after the beer hall putsch, an unstable country in the wake of a terrible agreement of the politicians at Versailles, a disaster. The peace to end all peace. Go ahead 10 years from that. We're in Hitler's Germany, right here. One of the greatest disasters of all of human history. Take it 10 years from that, 1947. We're within 6 days of the 70th anniversary of the Marshall Plan. A glimmer of global cooperation after the most disastrous war in human history. Take it 10 years after that. We're in the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, the start of the European community. 10 years after that, we are in the Vietnam War crisis, the beginning of a long-term collapse of American governance, the German economic miracle on the positive side. 10 years after that, we're in the throes of stagflation. 1977, the absolute already change of global dynamics that brought about. 1987, a miracle named Mikhail Gorbachev appeared on the scene, making possible a peaceful resolution of a conflict that nearly brought us to extinction on several occasions. 10 years after that, the Asian economic crisis. And I penned a little article after that saying, shouldn't we have a G16 rather than a G7 or G8? Why don't we have developing countries talk with developed countries? And published that in 1998 because I thought that it was time for there to be an expanded discussion, not just a discussion of a few rich countries. 10 years after that, we have Bear Stearns nearly dying and the death throes of the bubble that led to near financial meltdown a decade ago. And here we are today. Every 10 years has brought unbelievable change. And so the idea that it's going to look the same in a few years from what it looks like now is just a frailty of our psychology. And we're in an extremely unstable period right now. And we're facing tremendous, tremendous geotectonic changes. Most importantly is the decline of the United States as a leading power. And by the way, I have to tell you, sadly, while Trump is ghastly and absolutely psychologically unstable and incapable of this job, behind him is a broken political system. It's not just him. And the Republican Party is a bought political party in the hands of the oil and gas industry, and that's what's driving the climate change right now. This is just corruption of a democratic system by big money. This isn't about public opinion. This isn't about our voices. This is about the Koch brothers, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Continental Resources, who put in that idiot, Scott Pruitt, who knows nothing, and now he's in the Environmental Protection Agency. So don't ask me to respect my government. I do not. And I don't believe that we are in a safe period. And I don't believe that we should pretend that this is safe. It's, of course, not just the United States. I just know my own country's situation. There are many, many prima donnas that are not representing the values or the interests of their people. And we're living in a nuclear age. And more than that, we're living in an age where more insidious, less understood, deeper, and yet potentially catastrophic forces are at work. And of course, the environmental destruction that's underway is profound. So profound, so unprecedented, we're running to catch up with the realities. We're running to understand. As my biology guru, E.O. Wilson, says, we're destroying species far faster than we will ever have met them, because we haven't even classified the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of species we're driving to extinction because we don't even know of their existence in the ecosystems yet. And this is proceeding rapidly and nearly irreversibly. And we're at the brink on both the climate and on the biodiversity. And not to mention the social and other profound challenges we face. So I confess I'm a nervous wreck because I don't believe that we're doing the most basic things we should be doing to take care of ourselves. And I don't believe our political processes work. And least of all do I believe that democracies are organized for the sake of the political longevity of the office holders. That's the least interesting thing in the world, is how well they're doing, though it's the number one interest for them. So there's a basic misalignment of interests here. And that's what we need to grapple with. Now, let me smile for a minute and say a little bit of good news. Kind of the crazy other side of this. And maybe I'll, as I like to do, quote President Kennedy, who said in his inaugural address, "The world is very different now. For man holds in his mortal hands the ability to end all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life." So our existential reality is that all of those dangers which we are so prone to engage have on their other side the most wondrous opportunities for positive change if we can just learn to think, to deal with values, and to cooperate. It's not too much to ask, even of these 20 individuals that will meet in Hamburg in a couple of months. We're not interested in their fate. They need to be interested in our fate. So we have, as President Kennedy said, the ability to end all forms of human poverty. And he said that in 1961. And here we are, 56 years later, with technologies that he couldn't even have dreamt of, with more power in any of our phones than NASA had in the entire system as we went on the moonshot, with a $127 trillion world economy, $17,000 per person on this planet, and still there are poor people dying of their poverty. That's cruelty. That is absolutely recklessness. So I believe, as think tanks, it's our particular job to think. And I was delighted that the Secretary of State of Argentina said, "We need a plan." Then she said, "We'll turn to the World Bank." And I said, "Oh my God. That's about the last place we're going to get it. Maybe we're going to get an Ivanka fund, but we're not going to get a plan." And shame on the World Bank for going in that direction, because the daughter of the President of the United States says so. Where, Jim Kim, is your health plan, your education plan, your infrastructure plan? Why do we have an Ivanka plan? Come on. We're grown-ups. Let's be serious about this. This is not the way to behave. We need to take seriously what we're doing. We haven't had a health plan from the World Bank. God, I've tried for 15 years to get some thinking. But no, by the way, there's a deep issue there. They're a bank. They're a bank. They're not a development agency. They're a bank. Okay, there's room for banks, but they're not going to be the one to make the plan. Nor is the G20 governments. There's not even a secretariat of this thing. There's no continuity. There's not an office to call. We're here today because we have two gifted people, Dennis Snower and Dirk Messner, that brought us here together. And I thank you, and I've loved these people for decades as leaders. But that's why we're here, not because this is institutionalized, because we've been told to think through things, not because the governments are waiting for this, not at all. So I believe that we're really in a dangerous period. Again, Trump by himself makes the world dangerous, but he also represents larger U.S. forces, and by no means is this the U.S. alone. By no means. The number of terrible ideas around the world is staggering. The idea that Saudi Arabia, in a crisis of budget, in an era of decarbonization, needs most of all to buy $110 billion of arms from the United States. Are you kidding? But by the way, it won't happen. They can't afford it, and we're too disorganized. And so it's actually not even going to happen. It's just a kind of announcement. I was at the One Belt, One Road conference last week in Beijing. Now that's something for us to think hard about. President Xi Jinping gave a brilliant talk, and within the space of about 500 words, he had invoked Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta, and Leibniz. Not bad. I'm not holding my breath for the US president to match that. But he gave a panorama of Eurasian history and the links of the Silk Road and the exchanges of technology and know-how over the course of 2 millennia that was truly inspirational. But a job for us, because even China, with its magnificent capacity for this, Eurasia's awfully big. And to get right the idea of One Belt, One Road, and to make it compatible with climate, with renewable energy, with the advances of information technology, require us as think tanks to be working hard on this. So I'm thrilled to be together with you. I believe our job is to think, and think clearly, and to think honestly, and to think about the future, and to show how the goals that our governments have agreed upon in a moment of lucidity. In 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement can actually be achieved. I'm not talking about how they can win the next election and do it. Frankly, I don't care, though I don't think it's impossible. I don't care which politician wins election or not. I would advise you not to care also, because that's such an uninteresting question among the many fascinating questions we have. It's much more interesting to ask, how can we save 5.9 million children who will die this year under the age of 5, because we have not solved that problem yet adequately with finance and with the delivery of services. Or it's very interesting for us to ask the question, how can we achieve SDG 4 to ensure that every child in Africa and every child elsewhere gets at least a secondary education by the year 2030? That's a great question. That's so much more interesting than the next election. That's really to make the world safe. And how can we achieve what the scientists have told us cogently we need to achieve, and which we even promised to achieve in Paris on December 12, 2015, the decarbonization of our energy system worldwide. Do not argue about Donald Trump about climate science. he would only enjoy it. He'd look at you like you're the fool to argue with him because he doesn't give a damn about climate science. He gives a damn about Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and David Koch and Charles Koch and the money that has bought the US political system. That's what he cares about. So he's not interested in arguing with you about climate science. But our job is not to deal with that. Our job is to show the path to decarbonization and call out these crooks. Just to be clear, it's not our job to be quiet or pleasant when we have an irreversible cliff that we're facing. And that cliff could be the West Antarctic ice sheet or large parts of the Greenland ice sheet. And damn it, I live on a small island economy called Manhattan. And I just bought an apartment. And it's going to get flooded out unless we get this right. So, colleagues, because all of us are colleagues, we're members of think tanks, we're privileged to be here. I think we had a wonderful mandate from Germany this year. I'm incredibly grateful for it, and I'm incredibly grateful for the leadership of Dennis Snower and Dirk Messner. We have the organizational capacity to look ahead, to make plans, especially I like to call them pathways, as defining how we get from where we are to where we have promised ourselves in human decency we will be. And we are going to work together on this to make the pathways. And if these politicians won't listen, we'll bring in the next ones. Honestly, because this is too important to be left to 20 people. This is for 7.5 billion people and their children and their grandchildren. Thank you very much.